Hi, everyone. Hi, Tao. Super pleased to have you here with us in Athens. Tao and I go back more than a couple of years in Berlin. And needless to say, Tao has built an impressive business with GetYourGuide over the past 16 years. 1 billion euros of revenue, net revenue today, 1,000 people, majority in Berlin. And for those that don't know GetYourGuide, if you've traveled in a city or any location and you wish you had done something, then GetYourGuide can turn that into, wow, I did something amazing. And I think in Greece, it's actually very pertinent, the conversation, because tourism is a big part of the Greek economy, something like 15% of direct contributions to GDP. So it's great to have you here, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So the thought for today is we go through GetYourGuide's history in kind of 5 chapters. First is early days, raising money without external, building without external funding. Then pivoting into what GetYourGuide became today. Then experience around a KKR investment, which transformed the business. Then COVID, and then talk of the town, AI. So maybe we start with the first topic. I understand the first 4 years of building were without external financing. And the question is, what did that allow you to do where if you had financing, you wouldn't be able to do?
Yeah, so when we started the business back in 2008 as a student project, and then 2009 when we make this a full-time job, back then, we didn't have amazing events like these. VCs weren't really a big thing. And so we were bootstrapping for 2 to 3 years. So we were in Zurich, Switzerland, and paid ourselves, I think, roughly half the minimum wage in Switzerland. And what that allowed us to do, I think the main benefit is learning. So nowadays, if you're a young founder, you're expected to hit, 1 million ARR within a year, even ideally less than a year. You're expected to hire your first employees within the first couple of months, and that's just much harder. So I think the learning speed is much higher these days, and for us, the main benefit is that we had a lot more time to mature as manager, as leaders. So, pros and cons. It took a long time, and we've been at this for 17 years, but we also had time to grow as leaders.
Super. And 17 years is a long period building a business. Clearly, it has scaled internationally in those years. But the early part, I understand there was also a lot of introspection and figuring out what the right model is. And I think GetYourGuide started not as the business that is today, i.e. helping people experience different experiences in their city, but actually it was a student-led, peer-to-peer advice. Like you would go into a city and a student would kind of walk you around and offer you an experience. How did that go at the beginning, and how did that change over time?
Yeah, so the origin story was that my co-founder, Johannes, whom I've known since I was 16, we were traveling to China, and I'm from China originally, and I was his tour guide. And actually very similar to the Panathēnea, run by students, we thought, hey, let's create a platform where you can get locals, like students, to be tour guides anywhere, right? So you could be a tour, instead of being a volunteer at Panathēnea, you could maybe be a local tour guide. So that was the original idea. That didn't work. And I think the key insight for us back then was, one thing is like falling in love with your idea versus really understanding what customers wanted. So when we then really talked to customers, we had the student website on, and we had maybe 1 booking in 12 months, so obviously it didn't work. But when we talked to customers, they were saying that, well, if I'm going to Athens for the first time in my life, no offense, I don't want to be guided by a student. I want to be guided by the best tour guide there is in Athens, right? Ideally an archaeologist, a historian. I want to go to the Acropolis. I want to do a beautiful day trip, right? I don't want to be guided by amateurs. And that was really the big insight for us, which is just because we love the idea of creating like a peer-to-peer network, couch surfing, Airbnb style network, it sounds great in theory, but the customer ultimately didn't want it. They wanted professional, guides, professional tickets, and professional experiences. And I think that was really our main insight. And a little bit later on, this customer obsession remained a theme. So later on in 2013, 2014, when we raised our first rounds, one of the co-founders and back then CEO of Booking.com, Case Colin, came to join as a board member. And he also always asked us to obsess about the customer. And I famously remember we had a meeting once where he said, do you know what your customers want? And we said, yeah, of course we do, right? I mean, we're smart and we look at data. And so back then, this is 2013, right? So very much a search bar on the website. And he said, do you know what the top 10 searches are that customers are putting into your search bar? And we said, no, but we can look it up. And he said, well, how do you know what customers want when you don't even know something so basic as what people type? And so I think that was a good learning of how you can always be even more customer-centric and customer-obsessed.
Right. When you think you know what your customer wants, actually you might not fully know.
Yeah.
And the answer might be actually simple. Maybe picking up on that, you said you were extremely focused on quality of the experience. How did that actually play out in practice? Was it that you were vetting or you are vetting your partners, or you let that play out in terms of reviews from your customers, or something different?
Yeah, I mean, I would say nowadays we have a lot of local companies who want to join the platform, but frankly back then, we were just desperately calling people to join us, right? Because, I still remember in 2010, 2011, I was calling the Empire State Building and saying, hey, you should join the platform. It's not online yet. And obviously, he just hang up, right? So I think back in the days, it was much more of just doing hardcore sales, cold calling, cold emailing. And I think it's a bit different now. So now it's much more about curating for quality and making sure that, especially in the age of AI, and we'll talk about this later, why trust and quality is becoming even more important. But in the early day, it was just brute force, cold calling, and visiting local partners.
Super. So changing course a bit, early days, GetYourGuide, pivot, still successful. From 2008, fast forward to 2015, big investment by KKR. KKR, a large private equity fund, one of their first investments in Berlin, out of their growth fund, 50 million for GetYourGuide. Very visible transaction at the time, and likely also unexpected from a perceived venture-backed company. So what was like the discussion behind closed doors between you and Johannes and your advisors in taking KKR, and how did that investment allow you to scale and transform versus a traditional VC backing?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. So first of all, I think for a business, you have to, so raising venture funding is not a must, right? Because the problem is once you raise venture funding, you go down a path that is very hard to reverse, right? So I actually envy a lot of entrepreneurs who create businesses where you don't have to exit, where you don't have to go public or be acquired, but can just run healthy profits. And I think that's very laudable. So once you raise venture funding, you go down a path that is hard to reverse. So I think, as founders, I would encourage you to really think about, do you really need to raise funding? Now, when we decided to go down that path, for us it was, and we asked a lot of other founders what to look for, and so we never raised money from the highest bidder. So we never took the highest paying check. But for us, it was very similar to hiring for employees or hiring for co-founders, which is you look for culture fit and vision fit. And when I got married 2 years ago, a lot of the venture investors and VCs, were at the wedding because I've known them for over 10 years, right? So, you always say that in the worst case scenario, the company goes bankrupt. The best case scenario, you're going to be together for 10 plus years. So you really want to make sure that the partner of the fund or the fund itself is somebody you want to spend a lot of time with, especially when things don't go well. And KKR back then, we felt a lot of shared vision, shared values, super professional firm. But really, all the venture firms and investment firms we raised money from, it was always, are these people we really get along with? Yeah.
Super, thank you. So KKR 2015. Fast forward to COVID, 2020. I believe the business went from millions of bookings to 0 customers within a period of 3 weeks. And tough conversations started happening soon afterwards. And the conventional wisdom would be cut deep and cut fast. And I believe, at least for the beginning, you guys held course and you did something very different. So tell us a bit about that experience, how that played out over the months and quarters, where at the time you had a lot of uncertainty as well. And looking back, what did allow you to do that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise?
Yeah, so COVID was fun. So, as an entrepreneur, life is never boring, and that was definitely not a boring situation. So in February 2020, we were growing, 70%, 60% year on year, was growing super well. And then a month later, I think we had 3 bookings a day. So that was definitely a big cliff. There were a couple of, so obviously with the leadership team, we really thought about what we should do, and a couple of things emerged. So the first learning is that in crisis is when you really are tested against your long-term vision. Back then a lot of people said, hey, you should start doing virtual tours, right? Like maybe online tours, virtual tours. And however, we really believed in the human connection and in-person experiences, and we were long real-life experiences. And we thought this will come back, right? When everybody went to like online meetings, you had online event platforms, like all these online. We didn't believe in that. We thought, our business is about human connection. And we kept investing into the platform, kept investing into our supplier relationships, and we made sure to keep basically all the team intact, so we didn't do massive reductions and all of that, because we really believe in the long-term vision of the business. So I think that paid off. We said this COVID pandemic will be there here for 2, 3, 4 years. We don't know, but people will always want to travel. So there's this chart we showed internally when in 1950 you had about 50 million travelers worldwide, and in 2019 you had 1-point-something billion people traveling, and it's a chart that shows up and to the right. And it's one of the only markets in the world that just keeps going up and to the right. And there's still so much of the middle class in the world that hasn't traveled, that really wants to explore. And that's a belief that we've held on to, and it paid off.
Super. And I would say, Get Your Guide, for those that don't know, again, in Berlin has one of the strongest cultures in the market. They've been around for a long time, and founders are known to look after their team. And I think that pays off in multiple times over. So, question of our times, right? Fast forward, we're in a day and age where AI over, I'd say, the last 2-3 years has made significant improvements. I believe something like 60-70% of your partners, i.e. people offering experiences to customers, are using AI tools that are being developed by you guys. But the big question is, in an age where an agent could actually theoretically book your travel, your airfare, your hotel, where is Get Your Guide's position in that? Are you still in contact with your customer? Is there an agent replacing you? And if we were to think in 10 years from now, 2035, how is Get Your Guide looking at the time?
So I think maybe even before AI, one interesting data insight is when you look at e-commerce in the United States, something like 80% of people do research on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Google, but then 60% end up buying on Amazon, right? So already pre-AI age, people will research in a variety of places, but they will transact and make the decision-making on the place with the best selection, the best end-to-end experience, highest trust, in e-commerce case, high fulfillment. And for us, it's very similar. So when you think about experiences and travel, this is the most valuable time of the year. Nothing can go wrong. It cannot be AI slop, cannot be hallucinations. It has to really go right. And also with the age of AI, the cost of fraud is much lower. So anybody can make something up, right? You can create a website tomorrow and say, I have 1 million reviews, right? You can just claim it, and you can make up 1 million reviews. So the value of a brand that is about expertise and trust, I think has even more value in the age of AI. So you want a place where you can ask a question, what can I do in Athens? And you want to trust the recommendation that it has good prices, that it's high quality, it's curated. And we have 16, 17 years of expertise, and I think that's where we have a strong right to win in a very fragmented space. And I think you were alluding to it. I think the big opportunity for us is actually to use AI, especially on the B2B side. I think there's no coincidence that Anthropic has crazy adoption on the B2B side, probably even more than some of the other players on the B2C side, because it just empowers business professionals and entrepreneurs to do incredible things. So we've rolled out a lot of AI tools to our suppliers and local operators, and that has really empowered them to create even more experiences. So it's funny how AI is now transforming human creativity. So I would say a third of the experiences on the platform did not even exist 2-3 years ago. This is just people coming with new ideas to showcase their destination because they have some incredible story to tell. I was in Japan recently, and you have these people creating these, if you're into manga and animes, they have these tours where you go to a recording studio and you can record and meet some of these famous voice actors. This is very niche, but this niche is very big. And so it's really unleashing human creativity using AI.
Yeah, and you need to trust what Tao is saying, coming from a founder that on stage, just behind the stage, he was actually showing me something he just vibe coded a couple of weeks ago. So if the founder thinks AI, then the company is probably going to think AI as well. 2 words about your relationship with Johannes. You've known each other for many, many years. Johannes and Tao are the co-founders. What has kept you together? Probably with ups and downs, as any relationship. How has that worked out?
Yeah, so for those of you, who have co-founders, I mean, that's probably together with your wife and husband, probably the most important relationship you will have, because you just will spend so much time together. And Johannes and I, we've known each other since we were 16, so we go way back from high school. And I think the most important part is shared values, right? And at the same time, I think one advice I would also give is, and actually somebody who is started a business with his wife told me this, is like, you have to really separate, in their case, marriage and business. In our case, friendship and business. You have to almost like putting hats on. So always remember which hat is currently on. I think that's important. But ultimately, the benefit you get is incredible trust, right? And that trust and that non-political, way of working is something that transports into the business. So I like to think that we're a apolitical, so non-political organization, and part of that is because people can see our interaction. It's very based on trust, but also directness, right? So you give each other feedback. You don't shy words, but yeah, it's built on trust.
Super. So Tao, thank you very much on behalf of the audience, but also on behalf of Panathēnea for joining us. It's great to have founders of your caliber visiting Athens, and would love to see you more often. And thank you again for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.